Welcome back once again to Viper Bytes, and we brought you Thursday Night Football this week. We brought you Sunday Night Football with a flair, with a little bit of Super Mario Bros. To it, and now we're bringing you Monday Night Football, the Philadelphia Eagles, the Dallas Cowboys. We've got a +3 here for the Eagles. We've got an over-under of about 52, and we're going to break this game down for you before kickoff here. But first, let's talk about some key injuries on both sides. First off, for the Eagles. The Eagles' injuries to keep an eye on here. Jordan Mailata there, he's got that knee injury. Miles Sanders, chest, very likely to play. Zach Ertz, he was just activated early Saturday morning from COVID protocol. Something to definitely keep an eye on as this game progresses. Is his conditioning going to be there? How is he going to react? How that's going to affect Dallas Goedert going forward in this matchup. Brandon Graham, IR, Achilles. Brandon Brooks, chest, IR. We know those are the injuries going into here. And then for the Dallas Cowboys, Amari Cooper, last week, rib injury. Keanu Neal, he is out with the COVID. And then defensive end, Bradley Anae, on top of everyone else on that defensive line there for the Dallas Cowboys, which we will touch on a little bit later on in the show. Now, like always, you know how these previews break down. We're going to talk about a little bit about the spread here, but we're going to break down each individual position here, the quarterbacks, the wide receivers, the running backs, the tight ends, just to kind of get you ready for this fantasy football extravaganza, which I'm expecting this game to be. I'm expecting fantasy points galore. I'm expecting to hit that over when we're talking about points here. I think both these offenses are going to be explosive, and I think both these defenses are very banged up, allowing us to see these points that are going to be scored on Monday night. Now, in the last 7 road games, the Eagles are 1-6 against the spread and 9-3, though, towards the under in the last 12. Now, on the flip side, when we're talking about the Dallas Cowboys, they are 2-0 so far this season against the spread and 5-1 over their last 6 games. Now, saying that, last season, they finished 5-11 against the spread, and in their last 8 games as a favorite, they're 1-7. So really, this game could go either direction. Like I said, I'll give you my prediction and my score a little bit later. Now, breaking down what we know for the Eagles going into this matchup. We know Jalen Hurts. We look back what he did against San Francisco last week. 10 of 23, 190 yards. He did manage to connect with Jalen Reagor for a 36-yard touchdown, give or take, that we won't see on the score sheet because Jalen Reagor stepped out of bounds prior to catching that pass. But that would have made a huge difference from, we're looking at 10 of 23. Now that becomes 11 of 23, 190 yards now, busts up to 126 to 130 yards. Makes it a more viable game as far as the passing game is concerned for Jalen Hurts. You throw in his 82 yards in rushing, and all of a sudden, you know what? You've got yourself a game where he put up 240 yards passing, another 82 yards rushing, so another 300 yards total, 2 touchdowns. All of a sudden, Jalen Hurts is looking like a great start. I don't think that's going to change much in this matchup. I really think he's going to be solid. But when we look at some more things here, we're watching that A-dot climb from basically 3.6 yards in the season opener up to 15.7 last week. And Hurts has run for 60-plus yards in each of the last 5 games, including going back to the Dallas Cowboys last season in his start there. He had 9 rushes for 69 yards, and he also added 342 yards passing and a touchdown that game. So we know from last season, Jalen Hurts balled out against the Dallas Cowboys in that week, I believe it was a week 16 matchup there that he's seen them. So we want to make sure Jalen Hurts is in our lineups. He is a must start for this week. Now, as far as his passing options go, Devonta Smith didn't really have that big game last week against the 49ers. I talked about in the Sunday night preview there that we think Aaron Rodgers is going to be able to have his way with that 49ers secondary. Well, the Eagles didn't have that opportunity last week. We mentioned about Jalen Hurts and his 190 yards. Well, Devonta Smith only accumulated 2 catches for 16 yards with 7 targets. Speaking of that average depth of target, that A-dot that a lot of us are starting to look at a little bit more closely, it went from 8.6 in week 1, which is a great number, high percentage. That's something you want. You want that higher percentage type passes, which means more passes are coming, a better chance of getting open quickly, as opposed to the 23.6 yards last week. That is too deep. That's running Devonta Smith too far out, not giving him an opportunity to catch the ball, especially when we're looking at those injuries at left tackle, at guard. And these are some things you want to get that ball in and get it out quickly as possible. Now, you still get in that generous 26% target share through those first two games, but we'll see if Trevon Diggs follows him around on this game, because the Cowboys have allowed the second most yards, 241.5 yards per game to wide receivers in the early going. Now, talking a little bit more, there's a good chance, like we've mentioned here, that Trevon Diggs is going to follow Devonta Smith across the field. Diggs shut down Mike Evans in week 1. 1 catch, 10 yards, no touchdowns. Now, Keenan Allen in week 2 against the Dallas Cowboys and Trevon Diggs there. There was three receptions that were made by Keenan Allen with Diggs in coverage, and those 3 targets resulted in about 72% of all passing yards permitted by Diggs early on here. So still, Diggs, he's still ranked one of the lowest in the league as far as the passer rating when targeted. So I think a slight advantage to Trevon Diggs if he's going to shadow Devonta Smith throughout the game, which means, you know what, fire up them Jalen Reagor, because, you know, if Devonta Smith has seen Trevon Diggs, that means Reagor, who saw the second most targets with 5 last week, that's 21% against the 49ers, he's in for a bigger game this week. He's one of my sleeper plays. And Monday Night Football, you know what? YOLO, let's go. Let's air that ball out. Let's see what happens. We saw that connection in last week with Hurts and Reagor, that 36-yard touchdown that was negated by him stepping out of bounds. But he played 71% of the snaps. And that is something that's a step in the right direction for Jalen Reagor. We're waiting for that big breakout game. I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen Monday night against the Cowboys. Now, other sleeper options here. Quez Watkins here. We talked about him last week, 117 yards. That sounds great, doesn't it? Except it was on 2 targets and only 2 receptions, and one of those receptions was for 91 yards. So you're not putting Quez in your lineups. It's not happening. Don't do it, because it's not going to look good when it's all said and done. Now, the Cowboys are giving up the 5th most fantasy points per game at 49.4 points per game to wide receivers this season, but Watkins is not the guy you want to be going. That's why I really believe in Jalen Reagor this week. Now, at the tight end position, we look at what happened last week there. Zach Ertz, he's run the more routes. He's run 17 routes to Dallas Goedert's 14. Dallas Goedert had a bit of an advantage. He had 2 catches for 24 yards on those 2 targets. Ertz, 1 of 6 on 2 targets. But we got to keep an eye on that Ertz COVID situation. He's activated. He's ready to go. But is that conditioning going to be there? Is he going to be able to provide some fantasy relevancy in this matchup? I say no. But you know what? I've been wrong before, but I'm kind of erring on the side of precaution here. If you want to look at it here, I believe I'm looking at the numbers here right now. Goddard could use a little extra help. He had 6 for 66 and 1 receiving on 7 targets through 2 weeks. He posted 3 for 38 receiving last year against his only matchup against the Cowboys with Hurts in the lineup. So even with Hurts wasn't looking towards Dallas Goedert last year in this very same matchup, but we'll see if that changes. Now, the Cowboys gave up 2 touchdowns in week 1 to Rob Gronkowski. You know what? It's like a tight end was an opportunity there. But on the flip side, against the Chargers, they didn't give up any. However, 2 touchdowns were negated on the Chargers end. So this is an advantage that the Eagles can take advantage of. If Hurts can find Dallas Goedert, I think this is something they can definitely get at in this week's matchup. The Eagles did hold George Kittle to 4 receptions of 17 yards. So if you're looking at those other tight ends for Dallas a little bit later, that's something to keep in mind. Now at the running back position, Miles Sanders, he turned 14 touches into 59 scrimmage yards last week. He got that 67, that 2/3 kind of rolling it out there. Kenneth Gainwell played 33% of the snaps. He finished with 6 carries, 14 yards, added 2 receptions for 18. Huge disappointment. I really thought that Sanders and Gainwell were going to have big weeks last week. It did not materialize. So I'm expecting them both to have good weeks. Nothing spectacular, nothing crazy. But we look at it last year. Sanders did total 19 carries, 84 yards, 1 touchdown against the Cowboys with Hurts in the lineup. Now I'm using this with Hurts in the lineup when I'm talking about this, just to give you kind of a metric. We could talk about that week. Week 8 matchup, I'm not going to look at that. I'm going to look at more of the Week 16 kind of thing. Now, Dallas has faced a league low 13.5 running back carries per game so far, but they've allowed 4.4 yards per carry in those attempts. This is something that if the Eagles can get themselves up and ahead or keep themselves in a close game, look for the running game to get going. If not, if they get into a shootout, you know what? We may not see Miles Sanders. This game script is going to be very dependent, and I think it's going to be close. I really do. I think it's going to be a great game for Monday Night Football. Now, on the flip side, let's talk Dallas Cowboys. Let's talk about these offensive weapons. We've got Dak, we got Cooper, we got CeeDee Lamb, we got Elliott, we got Pollard, we got everyone going on this matchup here for the Dallas Cowboys. Who can you start? Who can you trust? So let's look at these numbers. Dak Prescott, not a good week last week. We really thought there was a good opportunity for him. It didn't happen. The Chargers defense kind of kept him in check. Now, he had 8.5 fantasy points last week. That's 237 yards passing. Did not have a touchdown, and that's what hurt his fantasy value last week. They went with a very heavy run approach there. Pollard had a good week. Ezekiel Elliott had a good week. We'll dive into those numbers here in a second. But Dak did average 8.8 yards per attempt last week, which is pretty impressive, and he only has those 13 rushing yards there, which we know he's still trying to recover from that leg injury last season. It's going to take some time before Dak starts to use his legs, trust his legs. Right now, it's kind of him trying to smooth that pocket a little bit and trust his arms and trust what he sees out on that field. Now, as far as the Eagles defense is concerned, the Eagles have allowed just one passing touchdown and have yet to give up more than 190 yards passing. That's pretty good. But considering the options there were Matt Ryan and Jimmy Garoppolo, not exactly quarterbacks that instill fear, but you know what? Jalen Hurts is not that kind of guy. When you think about it, look at it on paper, he's not going to beat you with his arm often. It's those legs, that Konomi Code type quarterback you're worried about. So I don't know if the Eagles get 190 yards. It's going to be interesting to see how it breaks down. Like I said, I feel a big Jalen Hurts week. I think that 190 yards that they haven't given up, I think the Cowboys are going to give it up this week. Now, at the running back position, we finally got to see a little bit of Ezekiel that we'd hoped for that we didn't see in the first week. Sadly, though, he was outplayed by his backup. Now, looking at these numbers, Elliott, 16 carries, 71 yards, 1 rushing touchdown. 2 receptions, 26 yards, got it 71% of the snaps against the Chargers. Tony Pollard, you know what? He only got 34% of the snaps. He got 13 carries, 109 yards rushing, 1 touchdown. He had another 3 receptions for 31 yards. Zeke, you want to get fed, but you got to do something about it. You're getting outplayed by Tony Pollard here. And I want to see more Pollard. I think Pollard is the better back of the two, but I think Jerry's money is invested into Ezekiel Elliott. So I think we're going to continue to see a 60 to 70% snap share going to Elliott, with a 30 to 40 obviously going to Pollard. But I think the explosiveness of Pollard is what's going to make the difference for this Dallas Cowboys offense if they want to get things going. You know, Elliott has seen just 4 targets on 68 routes he's run so far, while Pollard's got 7 targets on those 20 routes. We see that efficiency. We see where Dak's looking to when he gets that passing game going. He's got more trust in Pollard in the passing game. But who knows where this is going to go. Now, back in 2020, I like to talk about these matchups. Elliott had a combined 38 carries, 168 yards, no rushing touchdowns, 5 receptions for 34 yards in those 2 matchups against the Eagles last year. Effective, but nothing spectacular. You know, they were solid numbers, but nothing great. The Eagles are so far giving up 4.2 yards per carry and 8 catches per game to running backs. So that's something to definitely keep an eye on. That's why I really think Tony Pollard is going to be the guy to own here. I think both are startable. I'll talk about that where I feel you can get them here a little bit later. Now, talk about wide receivers. I love myself some CeeDee Lamb. He is helping his cause. He is one of the most targeted wide receivers in the National Football League, and that will continue this week. Now, he's got about a 30% target share through the first 2 weeks. He's turned 24 targets into 17-plus fantasy points in each of those games. He's getting 7-plus catches, 80-plus yards in both those games, proving to Dak that he can be trusted. We saw that connection kind of get started last season before Dak's injury. Well, we're really starting to see it go right now. Now, last season, without Dak against the Eagles, CeeDee Lamb posted games of 4 receptions for 27 yards and 3 for 65 and a touchdown. The Eagles so far are giving up the fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers through 2 games, but they've also faced the second fewest targets per game at 13. Now, Philly's defense has been stingy. We talked about that a little bit, but they have allowed 72% of their fantasy points to wide receivers out of the slot. Look what Deebo Samuel did to them last week. Deebo's been eating coverage up left, right, and center and doing it out of the slot. Well, early on, right now, if you look at where CeeDee Lamb is running it, almost half of his snaps, half of his routes are coming out of the slot. So that's why I think you can expect a big game from CeeDee Lamb this week. Now, talk about Amari Cooper. Cooper hasn't missed any time as a Cowboy, but it always seems like he's always nicked up with something minor. Enough minor injuries are really going to be a setback to your fantasy production moving forward. Your best ability is availability. However, if you're available, but you're not really putting out, are you really available? If that makes sense to you. Well, Cooper picked up another rib injury against the Chargers. He's less than 100% going into this. Last week, he had 3 catches for 24. We know Cooper's up. We know Cooper's down. When Cooper's on, he's one of the best receivers in the game, especially paired with CeeDee Lamb. Guys you can trust. I can't trust Cooper in this matchup. I don't know where he's going to be. I think he's going to be a solid wide receiver 2, maybe a wide receiver 3. Possibly, I think I feel more comfortable with him in the flex position. But you know what? It's a Monday Night Football game. You're probably not going to have him in that flex. Now, when we look at Cooper here, we talk about the sprains and strains. But even last year, Week 8, Cooper got a 5-yard reception. That's all he got in that Week 8 matchup. But in Week 16, he went off for 4 for 121, showing that up and down roller coaster that gives fantasy managers fits when they're dealing with Amari Cooper. Now, previously, we would have seen a Cooper versus Darius Slay type matchup, one-on-one. The Eagles like to do that little man matchup there. That was before John Gannon became the defensive coordinator for the Eagles, and now they're more of a zone-based defense. So that's something to keep an eye on. You're not going to see Slay versus Cooper. You're not going to see Slay come down the slot and play man up on CeeDee Lamb. You're going to see a lot more zone coverage, which I think is going to help these wide receivers eat over the middle. Now, talk about sleeper appeal. Cedric Wilson kind of falls into that category. Jawan Jennings scored last week against the Eagles. He ran, and that was out of the slot. Cedric Wilson has the same ability to do so. Now, Dalton Schultz, we talked about how the Eagles shut down George Kittle last week. So Dalton Schultz, and Blake Jarwin, they've been splitting the load. There's no consistency. The only consistency is that they're consistent, but not consistent for fantasy value, if you know what I'm saying on that one. And we look at this, and you can't really go with either one of these tight ends. You can't really put them in any position there. You're not going to want to use them. Last week, Jarwin, 3 receptions, 24 yards, 5 targets, 16 routes. Schultz, 2 targets, 18 yards, 15 routes. Nothing there screaming fantasy value. So who do you start? Who do you sit? Who can you trust? Well, for the Eagles, Jalen Hurts, QB1. You're putting him in your lineup. You're not thinking anything else. Devonta Smith, wide receiver 2, feeling comfortable with that. Jalen Reagor, super flex. You're putting him in not a super flex. He's a super flex option, but not a super flex option. You can trust him in your flex. That's what I'll say. You can trust him in your flex. I feel good about him. I think he's a big play about to happen. I can't wait. I think, especially if you're going into that Monday Night Football matchup, you're against maybe a team that's scoring a lot of points throughout the season, through the first 2 weeks, and you're like, I need a big play potential. I need a guy with a high ceiling. That's Jalen Reagor this week. Get him in your flex spot or your wide receiver, depending on where you want to go there. But Dallas Goedert, tight end 2, I think this week. I don't think Zach Ertz is going to factor in too much. Like I said, he just got activated from the COVID list, so don't expect a whole lot from Zach Ertz. I don't think the conditioning is going to be there. I think Goddard could be a solid tight end 2. If you don't have one of those top 12 tight ends, and really, if you don't have one of those top 3 tight ends, the tight end 12 is the same as the tight end 4 right now in fantasy. So you can feel okay about starting. I wouldn't love it, but I get where you're coming from with starting Dallas Goedert. Miles Sanders, RB2, flex option. Feel comfortable with them there. Now, the Cowboys, Dak Prescott, feel comfortable putting him as your QB1. I feel good about Dak again here as QB1. And I think you got Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard are both going to be running back 2 type players. I think Pollard's got the greater upside. I think he's going to flirt with being an RB1 this week. It would not shock me to see Pollard at RB8 when it's all said and done, and maybe Ezekiel Elliott kind of falling into that RB13, RB14 for the week. So that's something to keep an eye on. You feel comfortable starting both of them. CeeDee Lamb, I think he could be the wide receiver 1 overall this week because we're seeing the targets, we're seeing that trust, we're seeing that connection with Dak Prescott. So feel comfortable starting CeeDee Lamb week in, week out. Amari Cooper, I'm fading a little bit. I'll put him into a flex spot. I'll put him as a wide receiver 3. Tremendous upside like there is with Cooper every week. I'm just a little hesitant based on that rib injury and him being a little nicked up. That's a little bit of a pause for me there. How do I see this game playing out? Both defenses are banged up. We've talked about the Eagles' offensive line there. Well, their defensive line's beat up too. Brandon Graham, who gives them all that pass rush from the edge, he's out for the season with that Achilles tear. And on the flip side, Dallas is playing Micah Parsons at defensive end. Up until last week, the last time he played defensive end was in high school. Now, Parsons is a freak athlete. He did very well in that time, but that's just showing you how banged up these lines are. I see this game hitting the over, Dallas winning by more than 3 points. Let's call it Cowboys 30, Eagles 24. And let's make sure, more importantly, we have ourselves a heck of a football game. Monday Night Football, Dallas, Philly. That's our game. That's our wrap. But make sure you head over to dynastyvipers.com. Check that out. Want more stats like I've been throwing at you here? Head over to fantasypoints.com. Get into that subscription. Use code VIPERS or 21VIPERS10. That's code 21VIPERS10. Get that subscription. Get 10% off. I get all my information from Fantasy Points, and you can too. And that information is going to help you win your league. Till next time, catch you later.